My name is Sophie and I'm 24. My husband Drew is 26. We've been married for 3 years and have known each other since our freshman year of college. If you had asked me a few months ago, I would have told you that our marriage was good, maybe not perfect but certainly fine. However, everything changed one fateful night at a neighborhood party. I ended up mocking Drew in front of everyone and it was the final straw for him. He stood up, said it was over and walked out of my life. Now I'm living at my parents' house, feeling confused, hurt, and deeply embarrassed by my own actions. I want to tell my side of the story to try to understand what went wrong and how I lost the best person I've ever known. Looking back, Drew and I were very different people. He's an introvert, quiet, thoughtful, and prefers cozy nights in with a book or a movie. Me. I've always been the social butterfly, always craving parties and gatherings with friends. Our differences actually brought us together and for a while it worked perfectly. I admired his calm, steady nature and he loved my energy and zest for life. But after we got married, things started to shift. At 23, I made the decision to become a stay-at-home wife. There were no kids yet, just me focusing on finding myself. Drew had a stable job in tech and never complained. He allowed me to do whatever I wanted, probably because he adored me so much. However, what started as a supportive arrangement turned into me sleeping in, doing little housework and spending my days out with friends while Drew took care of everything: cooking, cleaning, laundry, and bills. Looking back, I see that I took advantage of his kindness, thinking he was just too soft or too accommodating. Over time, I started resenting that. I wanted excitement, someone who could challenge me. Drew was just trying to be the supportive husband he thought I wanted, but the very traits I had once found endearing became the things that drove a wedge between us. Slowly I started becoming cruel. I mocked him both to his face and behind his back. Some of my friends, old and new, encouraged it. They'd laugh about how whipped Drew was, how he never said no to me, and how he cooked and cleaned like he was my personal servant. I was flattered by their attention and I joined in, making jokes about his shy demeanor and his willingness to do anything I asked. We didn't have kids, so I didn't feel tied down by family obligations. I'd go out late and come home to find him half asleep, with dinner still waiting for me. The next day my friends and I would chat and someone would say something like, "Sophie, your man is so whipped." Instead of feeling guilty, I just laugh and say something like, "Yeah, he's basically my doormat." I cringe now as I think about it, but back then I enjoyed the attention and the feeling of power. I didn't realize how much it hurt Drew, or how those careless words would eventually lead to everything falling apart. Drew, for his part, tried to get closer to me. He'd plan weekend trips or romantic dinners, and he'd send me sweet texts when I was out with my friends. But the more he did, the less respect I had for him. As awful as it sounds, I saw his attempts as desperate or weak. My friends reinforced this view, telling me I needed someone on my level, who wouldn't be so easily controlled. They made me feel like I deserved more, someone who could stand up to me. One weekend, about a month before everything fell apart, we attended a neighborhood barbecue. Drew helped the host set up and man the grill, being the quiet, helpful guy that everyone liked but hardly noticed. Meanwhile, I was floating around with my girlfriends, gossiping and laughing. At one point, the conversation turned to relationships, and my friends started teasing Drew about how he did everything for me. They called him Mr. Housemaid, and I joined in, rolling my eyes at how he tried to contribute or tell a joke. My friends even made comments about how I had it easy because of him, and I didn't think twice about mocking him in front of everyone. I remember seeing Drew a few times during the event. He looked pale, maybe overhearing some of the conversation, but I didn't care. I was too caught up in the moment. That night, on the car ride home, Drew was quiet and I noticed the tension between us. I didn't think much of it at the time. I assumed he was just putting up with my behavior like always. But deep down, I started to sense that something was breaking in him. I didn't know it then, but that was the beginning of the end. A big part of the problem was the influence of my new circle of friends, especially a woman named Tori. She thrived on negativity and would always tell me that I was too young to settle down with someone like Drew. "How'd you get married so early to that shy guy?" she'd ask. Her comments fueled my arrogance, and I began to look at Drew with more contempt. My friends loved hearing about how I bossed him around. One Friday night, Tori and a few others came over for a movie, and Drew made dinner for all of us. Then he retreated to the bedroom. The minute he was gone, Tori started commenting on how sweet he was, but how dull he was too. Another friend joked, "Sophie's the real boss around here," and I laughed along. We devoured the dinner he made for us and left the kitchen in a mess. The next morning, guess who cleaned it up? Drew, of course. I didn't even apologize. That was the dynamic for months. Each time I cut him down, I'd see a flash of hurt in his eyes, but he'd swallow it because he loved me. The worst part is that I rarely told him I loved him back. In fact, I started to doubt that I still did. And then came the final blow. It was another neighborhood event, this time a bigger party. Drew, being the sweetheart he was, volunteered to help set up the tables and chairs. I showed up later with Tori and the others, wearing a new outfit I'd bought with Drew's money. He greeted me with a tired but loving smile and asked if I wanted him to grab me a drink. I barely looked at him and gave a dismissive nod. As usual, my friends giggled at how subservient he was. A couple of hours into the event, the atmosphere shifted, and we were sitting around a big table in someone's backyard. Tori started making comments about Drew again and I joined in too. That was the moment I knew I had pushed him too far, but it was also the moment I realized that I had already lost him. "Sophie, how do you manage to keep a man so whipped?" Her smirk was sharp, and the rest of us, a group of about 8 including a few neighbors I'd become friends with, chimed in with teasing or mocking comments. We were probably more than a little tipsy, and Drew joined us, likely curious about the conversation or wanting to be involved. Tori noticed him approaching and with a sweet smile teasingly remarked, "Hey Drew, we're just talking about how you'd do anything for Sophie, right?" She winked at me. I rolled my eyes and decided to show off. "He practically begs me to boss him around," I said loud enough for the whole group to hear. My laughter felt forced, but Tori and the others roared with amusement. A couple of guys from the neighborhood looked uncomfortable, but no one came to Drew's defense. The laughter died down and that was when I saw it, the look in Drew's eyes. For the first time he appeared cold and distant. He quietly spoke, "Sophie, can we talk alone?" The group fell silent, exchanging glances. I shrugged, still a bit buzzed, and followed him. He led me away from the group, around the side of the house. I barely registered what was happening before he turned to me and said, "I'm done, Sophie. This is over." I blinked, confused. "What do you mean? Done with the party?" I tried to laugh but the air felt thick. "No," he said firmly, "I mean us, our marriage, everything. I'm going home to pack your things. You're not coming back." My heart skipped a beat. I tried to comprehend his words. "Drew, wait, why are you so upset?" "It was just jokes like always," I stammered, but he was shaking his head. "I've put up with it long enough. You've disrespected me, humiliated me, and turned everyone against me. I loved you but you don't love me. You mock me. I'm leaving. Or rather, I'm kicking you out." My words failed me and I stood frozen, realizing the weight of his words. In a quiet, resolute tone he added, "I'll have your things on the porch. Don't be there when I get home." With that he walked off, leaving me standing there, stunned and breathless. When I returned to the table, everyone's eyes were on me. Some smirked, others looked uneasy, and the light-hearted atmosphere of the party had disappeared. It was clear to everyone that something had happened. I felt foolish, the sting of humiliation crawling under my skin. I tried to keep my composure but the tears were already welling up. Without saying another word, I rushed to find Drew but he was already gone. I called him repeatedly but he didn't pick up. Desperation crept in. A neighbor who was still sober enough to drive offered to give me a ride to my house. When we arrived, I saw Drew's car parked in the driveway. The lights in the house were on. My stomach tightened. I thanked the neighbor, got out, and hesitated at the front door. I stepped inside and the house was eerily quiet. I heard movement from down the hall and followed it. Drew was in the bedroom, furiously packing a suitcase, tossing my clothes in without any care. "Stop!" I cried, tears streaming down my face. "What are you doing?" He spun around, his face pale and his eyes filled with a mix of heartbreak and anger. "I told you, Sophie. It's over." He zipped the suitcase closed violently. "You can stay wherever you want, but not here. We've been married for 3 years, I pleaded. "You can't just throw me out." "Watch me," he spat. "I should have done this months ago, the moment you started humiliating me in front of everyone. You ended whatever we had left." He shoved past me, dragging the suitcase towards the front porch. "Drew, please," I begged, stumbling after him. "I was drunk. It was just talk nonsense." He shook his head, his voice trembling. "No, Sophie. You've been doing this for months. You have no respect for me." He turned away and added, "I deserve better." I collapsed onto the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. As he continued packing my things, I tried to reason with him. What about everything we built? The love we had? But he glared at me. "You destroyed it with your mockery and disrespect." In that moment, I realized how wrong I had been, how I had underestimated him. I never thought he would stand up for himself, but now that he had, it felt like a final, brutal blow. When I refused to leave, he threatened to call the police. "This is my house. I bought it before we married. You're the one who has to go. I gathered the last remnants of my dignity, grabbed what I could, and walked out into the night. The neighbor who had driven me was gone, so I called my dad, sobbing uncontrollably. When he arrived and saw me with suitcases outside, shock registered on his face. He didn't say much, just loaded my things into his car, glaring at the house. My mom was furious with me for treating Drew the way I had. She believed a wife should respect her husband and made it clear that I had done this to myself. "We won't let you be homeless," she added, though I could hear the disappointment in her voice. The following days were an endless cycle of trying to get in touch with Drew, but he wouldn't respond. I left voicemails, texts, and messages apologizing, but he didn't answer. I knew deep down he was done. Meanwhile, Tori and the others distanced themselves, offering no real support, just messages like, "That's rough," before vanishing. The hypocrisy stung. I realized how shallow they had been, laughing at my jokes but abandoning me when I needed them most. I spent my days job hunting. I had never held a real job, relying on Drew's income, and now I had no choice but to find one. My dad lectured me about finding work. My mother still gave me disappointed looks, but at least she let me stay in my old room. I applied for anything I could, from retail jobs to office assistant positions. It wasn't easy, especially with my limited skill set, but I kept trying. The shame of living with my parents at 24 was unbearable. I couldn't shake the regrets. I regretted the way I treated Drew, the lack of a career, and how I let my friends encourage a destructive attitude. But there was also a part of me that resented Drew for leaving so suddenly. I knew logically I had pushed him too far, but emotionally, it was hard to let go. My father told me it might be the best thing for me. My mother said I'd learn to respect others in the future, though it was painful to admit they were right. I posted about my situation on social media, trying to find some understanding, but instead, I was met with criticism. People called me toxic, entitled, and said Drew was better off without me. Some suggested therapy, a job, and to apologize sincerely, but Drew still wouldn't respond. The days turned to weeks, and my mother heard from a neighbor that Drew seemed to be doing fine, maybe even happier. That knowledge twisted the knife in my heart. I had always thought he'd miss me, that he'd regret our separation, but it seemed he was better off without me. I learned that some of my old friends, including Tori, were now trying to get close to Drew. Ironically, the same friends who had once belittled him were now trying to date him. A mutual acquaintance told me Drew wasn't interested, that he saw right through them. That gave me a bitter satisfaction but also reinforced how thoroughly I had lost him. Eventually, the divorce was finalized. We had no children, no major shared assets, and the house was his before we married. The judge granted me a small settlement, and that was it. I tried to move on, but I still texted Drew every now and then, sending apologies that were never answered. Now, months later, I'm focusing on rebuilding my life. I have a part-time job and I'm starting to save. I don't know if I'll ever find someone like Drew again, but I also wonder if I deserve someone as good as he was. The truth is, I only saw his value when it was too late. I lost a good man because I mistreated him, thinking he would always be there. Now, I live with the consequences every day. If there's any advice I can offer, it's this: cherish the kindness in your partner. Don't mock them for their loyalty. Don't let shallow friends or the thrill of teasing overshadow real love. I do love Drew in my own messed up way, but it's too late. He's gone and I'm left picking up the pieces of my mistakes.